Well, hello, everyone. Thanks very much for taking the time out of your day to join us for information on the West Reserve Drive Corridor Planning Study. We're appreciative of your willingness to participate in this virtual platform. Before we get started, I'll go over a couple housekeeping items. We'll be fielding questions using the Q&A function. That's the button that looks like speech bubbles at the bottom of your screen. Questions that are applicable to the general public will be addressed live during this meeting. Meanwhile, to be respectful of everyone's time, if your inquiry is specific to your property, a study team member will follow up with you directly in the next few days. Please also feel free to add any other comments that you wish be heard by the study team using the same Q&A button. To have an accurate record of all of your feedback, we'll need to funnel all questions and comments through that Q&A function and won't be using the raise hand tool for today's meeting. Following this meeting, you're also welcome to offer thoughts and ask questions using the contact information provided at the end of the presentation. Finally, it's important to note that this meeting is being recorded and will be added to the study website for future reference or for anyone who wasn't able to attend today. All of MDT's efforts, including corridor planning studies like this one, contribute towards the goal of Vision Zero, working towards zero fatalities and zero serious injuries on Montana's roads. You can move ahead, Cody. This meeting is held pursuant to Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which ensures that no person shall be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefit of, or otherwise subjected to discrimination on the basis of a protected status under any MDT program or activity. Presenting today, we have both MDT and consultant team members. My name is Lisa Olmstead. I'll be facilitating. I'm part of the DAL consultant team, along with Cody Salo, who is the DAL project manager. With MDT, Vicki Cernich is the corridor study project manager. Jacqueline Smith, also with MDT, is also here today to answer any questions related to the Missoula district. With that, I'll pass the baton to Bob Vosen, Missoula district administrator, to give you an introduction to this corridor study.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Bob Vosen. I'm the district administrator for District 1 with Montana Department of Transportation. In addition, I'm also a resident of the Flathead Valley. I have a daughter going to school at Flathead High and very much involved with the community. So I see the needs of the community definitely firsthand. Today, we're going to cover kind of a review of the goals and the purpose of this study and what that process looks like, how it works. We're going to also give an overview of the existing features of the road and the traffic conditions, what the study brought forth, discuss some of the needs and objectives of the corridor, review the study findings and what those recommendations are. And then we'll talk about the next steps in the process and open it up for questions at the end. So I guess the one thing that I do want to make sure that everybody understands, I know that a lot of people, when they heard that MDT is going to do a study, you could kind of hear the collective sigh and groan, if you will. Most people feel, why are you doing a study? When are you going to build? That's what everybody wants to know. When are we going to build, and when are we going to work to alleviate the congestion that we see up there? This study actually allows us to better position ourselves to get a project on the ground, to get stakes in the ground to start the construction process. It really helps facilitate the process that we have to go through. I think most people are cognizant of the fact that MDT is funded to a huge portion by federal highway dollars. It's not all state funds that go in there. So when we're using someone else's checkbook, if you will, we've got rules that we have to follow, and some of that is the processes that we have to go through. So this study is going to help us better position ourselves to get when the funding's available, so that we can move forward with a project in as timely a fashion as possible. With that, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Vicki Cernich, so that Vicki can give you maybe a more in-depth discussion of what this planning study process is going to look like. So Vicki?
Thanks, Bob. I'm Vicki Cernich, and I am the planner for the Missoula District with MDT. And I'm going to give you a little overview of the planning study process and the purpose of corridor studies. So, like Bob said, the planning study is going to set us up for moving on into project development. And as you can see on this slide, that's sort of the simplified version of the life cycle of a transportation project. And we are the star in planning. So that's what a corridor study is. It's a planning study. It's a high-level review to understand the various factors and conditions. We look at social and economic and environmental effects at an early stage. It involves conducting reviews of existing safety and operational and geometric conditions and environmental resources to identify needs and constraints of the study corridor. The corridor study provides a link between early transportation planning and environmental compliance efforts for any potential future projects. So the goals and the purpose of the corridor study, like I said, we start with a high-level scan of the study area. We identify the needs and objectives through a collaborative input, and that collaboration includes a technical oversight committee, which are subject matter experts here at MDT. We reach out to the federal and state and local resource agencies, as well as the public through informational meetings like these. From there, after the needs and objectives are identified, we develop potential improvement options. These improvement options include estimation of costs, assessing potential impacts, and the overall feasibility of the options is looked at as well. I think an important thing to note on this slide is that the improvement options also identify short and mid and long-term improvement options. So it's not, one giant project. If there's a smaller project that can move forward earlier, that would be, an example of a short-term improvement option. All of this information, after that, the next step is to compile all of this information and data into a corridor study report, and that's used in the environmental process as well as project development if a project moves forward. So as far as the planning phase schedule goes, we started the corridor study in September of 2020, and it began with a review of environmental factors in the existing projected conditions report. From there, that information was shared with the public and resource agencies and stakeholders to make sure that we didn't miss anything and that all considerations were looked at. We requested feedback and we received some great feedback during the first public information meeting in March. And then we had a resource agency meeting in April, and there've been ongoing meetings with the technical oversight committee. The input received from all of these meetings was referenced as the needs and objectives were established for the corridor. And then after the needs and objectives are developed, the information, all of that information is used to develop the potential improvement options. And after all of that is said and done, all of the information to date is rolled up into a draft corridor study report. So the objective, so right now we're in September 2021 and we're at PI meeting number 2. And the objective of this meeting is to share what we've learned with our potential improvement options and share that with you and the research agencies and the stakeholders, and to get your comments. So following completion of our 30-day comment period, which starts today, comments will be incorporated into the final document and then ultimately posted on MDT's website. So next up, Cody's going to present a study overview, including findings and recommendations.
All right, thanks, Vicki. I'm Cody Salo with Dell. We're a consulting firm that's helping MDT and its partners through this process. So I'm going to review the corridor and its challenges and discuss how it was determined that West Reserve Drive should be studied in the first place. So West Reserve Drive serves a wide range of uses, including commercial, agricultural, industrial, and residential. We know there's rapid growth and it's contributing to traffic congestion, and many of the intersections along the corridor are backed up and have a lot of queuing. And I think a lot of you have been a part of that and understand exactly what's happening out there. This has also led to a high number of crashes along the corridor, and that's a safety concern that we have, and we've seen that through statistics. We also know that there are major developments underway within the area, in addition to all the overall growth in the north end of the Flathead Valley. So how was West Reserve identified as a candidate for a corridor study? As local MDT staff learn of various issues along a corridor, and we have public comments and so forth coming in, there's a lot of observations of what might be happening as far as issues and concerns along a corridor. So through that input, certain corridors are selected for the corridor study process. So with the amount of growth and concerns about traffic and safety, this corridor was a prime candidate for a corridor study. Corridor studies, again, provide an opportunity to review all of the conditions from a high level to gain a better perspective on long-term improvements and overall management into the future. So now let's discuss the study area, the needs and objectives that were identified through the corridor study process, and then the recommended improvements that we've come up with. Our study limits extend from the US 93 intersection to the west, all the way to the US 2 intersection on the east. And we also included a segment of Whitefish Stage Road, including a half mile north of West Reserve and about 300 to 400 feet south of the intersection with West Reserve. There's other local work that's ongoing, including a future MDT project north of the study area on Whitefish Stage Road, so we're aware of that. Along with the other developments, including the Rose Crossing development just to the north as well. So we reviewed the study area conditions within a buffer, and this buffer for this study was about 250 feet on both sides of the road. So basically 500 total feet along the length of those roadways. And again, like Vicki had mentioned, this study included review of everything from environmental and social factors, existing physical conditions, including the roadway, the traffic signals, drainage. And then we took a look at future projections, including traffic growth along the corridors based on information that we had gathered, data collection that we had done, and then came to our own conclusion when we actually then took that and compared that to other local studies that were ongoing, including the Kalispell long-range transportation plan. We were very consistent in the growth rates and ended up using exactly the same growth rates that the other folks had arrived at. So from this foundational information, study team then determines needs and objectives for the corridor through a collaborative process that Vicki also described earlier. So the study identified two key needs along the corridor. The first need is to improve the safety of the corridor. The number of crashes along West Reserve Drive has doubled in the last 10 years. So that's definitely a concerning statistic. Some of the other key stats that we identified as well, there were 725 total crashes in that time frame, 58% of which were rear end collisions. And oftentimes rear end collisions are an indication that there's traffic backing up and people are rear ending each other. 38% of those crashes occurred during congested traffic conditions. So basically from that evening rush hour from 3 to 6 p.m. So that's another indicator that we considered. The other key need the study identified was to improve the corridor transportation operations. And this need is really targeted at the amount of traffic that's out there on the corridor and to provide opportunities for other users as well, including walking and biking. So some of the key stats that are associated with that need, we have a 2.4% growth rate per year in traffic, which is significant. And we have numerous intersections along the corridor that are at capacity or projected to be well over into the future if nothing changes. So as part of the needs and objectives identification, we also talk about all of the other considerations that we need to roll into any potential improvements that could be made. So this is a brainstorming session that we hold with the TOC, Technical Oversight Committee, and stakeholders to understand what else is out there that we should be concerned about. So I have a few examples just to share here in addition to what's shown on the slide. We know there are numerous local plans underway and future developments that we need to consider. We also need to consider funding availability and the maintenance responsibilities of any future improvements. So basically who takes care of what when it's all said and done. We know the Stillwater and Whitefish rivers are important environmental resources. They do have some level of impairment that we have to be aware of. And we also understand that there are stormwater requirements within the Kalispell area, and stormwater must be handled appropriately. We also understand that potential improvements may impact those that are adjacent to or travel on the corridor. So as we were reviewing potential improvement options, we kept that in mind as we were trying to identify ways to improve the corridor. Once we understood the key needs and objectives of the corridor, the next step in our process is to really find ways to improve those one way or another. And so what we did was go through a collaborative effort to brainstorm ways to try to make West Reserve Drive and Whitefish Stage Road better than they are today. And so generally we found improvements in 5 different categories, and I'm just going to briefly explain that. We identified intersection improvements, which would typically include additional lanes, turn lanes. Maybe there's ways to improve the signal timing to try to alleviate some of that backing up that occurs at those intersections. We also identified roadway widening as some potential relief along the corridor. And of course, this is additional lanes, shoulders, sidewalks, boulevards, things of that nature. We also identified multimodal improvements after we reviewed the connectivity and some of the lack thereof throughout the corridor. We also found ways through travel demand management. These are essentially methods to try to reduce some of the traffic on a corridor. So these are kind of longer term methods in which essentially there's programs in place to help people either take different routes or carpool or whatever that might be. We also looked at access management. So this is essentially a review of approaches along the corridor to see if there are any issues or challenges that might be improved at those locations, with the ultimate goal that operations and the traffic along the corridor are maintained at a high level. So let's get into some of the specific recommendations that are coming through the study. So through the corridor study process, we have some recommendations that are prepared, and we've included all of these in the draft corridor study report, which is available on the MDT website. And I encourage you all to go spend some time and review that document and some of the appendices that are included with that. There's a lot of good information. It will take you a little time to read it. But I'm going to discuss some of the specific recommendations that are coming out of the draft study at this point. So specifically, the intersection improvements have a handful of targeted lane additions and so forth that would help improve operations at these intersections. So I'm going to run through each one specifically. At US 93 on the far west, one of the things we identified was that dual left turns on the east and westbound legs would offer some improvement, and that some of the signal timing could be changed at that point, which would help alleviate some of the traffic. At the Hutton Ranch Road intersection, just to the east of US 93, what we're recommending is that really no change would be made until the roadway would actually be widened through this area. But essentially there would be more through lanes at the intersection to help accommodate some of that traffic. Now, most of you are familiar with the Whitefish Stage Road intersection, and this one has some acute traffic issues. So we have a number of recommendations that we've seen as far as how to handle the traffic there. So we would recommend adding north and southbound left turn lanes and east and southbound right turn lanes, along with additional through lanes on West Reserve. So this is a pretty significant addition to the Whitefish Stage Road intersection. Currently, most of the maneuvers are all together in one lane, so that does create quite a bottleneck. At the US 2 intersection to the far east, we would recommend providing dual east and northbound left turn lanes, east and southbound right turn lanes, and at some point a future westbound left turn lane to accommodate all the traffic there. Now I'm going to talk about the roadway widening. So specifically on West Reserve Drive, the draft study found that 5 lanes is necessary for the corridor to accommodate all the traffic. And what we did as part of the study team was take a look at the potential cross sections. And essentially what I'm saying is the lanes, the shoulders, curb and gutter, boulevards, and sidewalk that would be appropriate within the corridor at these locations. And so there are some specific recommendations for the cross sections shown as graphics in the draft corridor study report. As far as Whitefish Stage Road is concerned, we would also recommend that shoulders be added to Whitefish Stage along with some slope flattening to improve the safety along that corridor. For access modifications, we did review a handful of locations where we knew there were some challenges as far as making maneuvers to and from West Reserve due to the traffic. And we looked at ways to try to improve them, especially as the traffic increases over time along West Reserve. We did identify the need to limit and potentially optimize some of these approaches at several locations to try to maintain traffic operations and safety. And we also identified the need for long-term access planning along the corridor. So let's review the next steps for the study and what the process will be moving forward. So there's really 3 stages to a project. And so we're currently finishing up the planning stage, and this is partly what Vicki was describing earlier in the presentation. So this planning stage includes your input and comments. And so we're looking for feedback from you on the draft corridor study report, offering any insights and input that you have. So following the completion of the study, MDT and its partners will consider what projects might be possible coming out of the study. The project development stage identifies and secures funding for specific projects and then sets timelines for designing those projects. And then finally, a design will move to construction following coordination with landowners, utilities, partners, and stakeholders. Again, the study is a resource and a tool that aids MDT and its partners in determining potential improvements to the corridor. So this is a long-term vision for improvement along West Reserve Drive and Whitefish Stage Road within the study area. So now I'll let Lisa explain how you can contribute to the study.
Great, thanks, Cody. So public participation and comment is incredibly important to planning studies. So there are numerous ways for you to offer comment related to corridor concerns, ideas, or even just thoughts on the draft study. The draft corridor study has been uploaded to the project website for you to review in its entirety if you wish. A 30-day comment period will follow today's public meeting. Please feel free to submit your comments through email, via phone call, or using the comment function on the project website. And if you do have thoughts to provide now, you can also put them into the Q&A. And we are starting to get some comments coming in and questions. So let's dive into those. The first one, Cody, I think is probably a question for you. What is the thinking behind the recommendation for an 8-foot sidewalk width on the north side of West Reserve and only 5-foot sidewalk width on the south side?
Sure. So one of the things that we were considering with the corridor is basically improving operations for all users. And so the idea is that providing different widths of sidewalks do provide some opportunities for bicyclists. And so the concept is basically to provide potentially an 8-foot width or so on the north side, which would allow some connectivity in the future for some other potential bike paths that could be out there as well, shared use paths in general. So that was the general concept. It provides for all users through some additional width.
And a clarification question from the same person: is north and south of West Reserve sidewalk to be built connecting Highway 93 to Highway 2? So Cody, do you want to talk about what the study recommends, and then maybe?
That'd be great, Lisa. So as part of our review of the corridor, we did identify connectivity of sidewalks to be an issue. As you're probably well aware, Catherine, there are sidewalks lacking, and essentially the sidewalk jumps from one side to the other at one point. And so there are some issues there as far as overall connectivity for these other users in the corridor. And so the recommendation that we've got at this time in the draft corridor study is full connection of sidewalk from 93 to 2.
And Jacqueline, do you want to touch on anticipated construction? Catherine, the way Catherine phrased her question, specifically asking, will things be built? We should probably clarify that.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, at this time, we do not, we need to look at, I should say, we need to look at the funding availability that we have for this route. And then from there, we can see what, with the funding we have, what we can construct at the time. So right now, we don't have a date set when construction can occur, but we are one step closer and helping to identify that, knowing some rough general estimates for how much the work is going to be.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Mhm.
And one person just provided a comment, just said, thank you. This plan will certainly help public transit to expand. Thanks for providing that comment, Dale. Erica asked, is there any potential for increasing the access potential down to the river? Cody, do you want to touch on that for starters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the study looks at a lot of the environmental factors and so forth, Erica. We don't necessarily get into all the specifics and nuances of exactly what would be included with a project, for example. So essentially what would happen next is, as MDT and its partners would identify a project, let's say that would reconstruct a bridge, for example, over the Stillwater, with the widening and so forth, they would then step through the process there to decide, you know, what other amenities or access or whatever should be included with the project. So it's a great question. It's one that we don't have an answer to today, but maybe the MDT folks have any other thoughts or ideas as far as that particular question.
Bob, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, you bet. One thing that, again, I know everybody gets tired of hearing about it, but funding does become an issue, and it's very difficult to justify spending transportation dollars for what would be viewed as a recreational purpose. This road is now, due to the recent reclassification, it's on our primary system, which is definitely a challenge system as far as funding for overall needs. And something that we definitely want to look at. We can try to work with other partners, whether that would be FWP or other agencies, but very, very challenging. And again, it's like a lot of the things that we deal with. Getting something built is only the first part of it. There's also the long-term ongoing maintenance cost and responsibility. So if we build an access point, what does that look like for the ongoing maintenance? So something that we definitely will keep in the back of our mind. We can continue to have those discussions. It'll be part of the notes of this. So as we go forward, we can continue to have that discussion. But I encourage people that support that to, MDT is going to need the help of some other agencies if we want to take something like that and move it forward.
Bob, well, you're unmuted. I'm going to kick this question to you. Could the right turn lanes on Whitefish Stage, both from east and west, be done soon?
You know, that's one of the things that this study did provide, and I'm going to ask Cody to get into it a little bit more in detail, but generally we looked at what some interim things that we could do in the short term, and that was one of the things that, if I remember right, was discussed, but it would be a significant cost to do it, and it would have a really short-term benefit if we just, it'd be a I don't want to use a Band-Aid. It'd be an improvement, but the benefits wouldn't serve very well when that would it needs to move to the next phase. And I'm really not eager to go in and do construction in an area knowing that I have to come back in just a few short years and again disrupt traffic for a summer to do it again correctly. Really try to avoid the throwaway costs or expenses. So Cody, can you go a little further detail on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. That's one of the benefits of doing a corridor study like this. We actually get to take a look and see if there's other kind of, we'll call them short-term or medium-term or long-term solutions. But basically, are there steps in between that we could potentially consider that would alleviate some pain potentially? And so it's a great opportunity for us to actually review all those, put some costs to them, and discuss them. One of the things we found at the Whitefish Stage Road intersection was that there were some, I'll call them short-term improvements, and your comment about the turn lanes is spot on. You could potentially alleviate some of the traffic issues there by doing that. But essentially what's going to happen is you're going to touch the intersection twice in a short period of time. And I mean, basically within 5 to 10 years. And so essentially, you've spent a lot of money to do some improvement, but it doesn't actually solve all the problems at the intersection. And you end up having to come back and then basically buy more right of way, buy more equipment for the traffic signal, interrupt traffic for an even longer period of time. So the long and the short of it is we identified something very similar to what you're asking about, but ultimately because it wasn't going to actually solve the issues as far as the needs and objectives of the corridor, it didn't make as much sense to recommend that. So what we're actually pushing for as a recommendation is to go to a situation where they're all those turn lanes are essentially separated so that we get the full benefit of a new traffic signal at that location. Good question though, do appreciate that.
Cody, similarly to what we did to Bob, well, you're unmuted. I'm gonna
Sure.
give this question to you. Did the corridor study consider wildlife crossings?
Oh,
This person
sure.
says they live on Whitefish Road or Whitefish River, and fencing to lead deer and bear under the bridge on Whitefish River would help reduce wildlife kills via vehicle.
Okay, so I'll explain generally what comes out of a corridor study process. So we do look at biological resources, including all the wildlife, fish and so forth in the area. So we do have some understanding of the fact that this is technically, it is potential bear country. We do understand that there are bull trout in the rivers, things of that nature. And so those items are all identified in the corridor study. Again, this goes to the level of detail of a planning study versus a project. And so as a project would potentially move forward coming out of the study, that information is present and would be considered at the time the project is developed. And so essentially it's not a decision that's made with the planning process. It's something that would come through the actual design development, which would be the next step of the process.
And I'm going to add just a little bit
Sure.
to that. It's a great point, Cody, something that we do consider when topography in the area allows it. But the other really key component to wildlife fencing is we need to have all of the adjacent landowners support it, because we are essentially altering the path of animals. So if there's animals crossing at point X and we shove them to Y, typically the people at point X are happy, but we have to make sure that the people at point Y are still receptive to this change that we're going to force upon them. So it is in a project like this that is suburban to urban in nature, we need to make sure that it's a lot more difficult than just throwing up fence. So, but it is definitely something that we do consider anytime we have a project like this.
Bob, maybe you want to take a first stab at this question, and maybe Cody will need to chime in too.
Mhm.
What are your plans to help alleviate the use of Country Way as a bypass from West Reserve to Whitefish Stage?
So that's a good question. We know it's taking place right now. the challenge is, how do we keep access to a road that is a public route? So the short answer is, we can't stop people from utilizing what is a public right of way. We can try to make sure that it's maybe not as desirable. I think the right answer to get people to not use Country Way is to rebuild Reserve Street so they don't have a desire to get down into a surface neighborhood street. They'd rather stay on the primary route, or until they get to Whitefish Stage or wherever it is they're going. So the best answer, I think, is we want to solve the issues at hand and not make it desirable for them to utilize that route. Cody, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, Bob, that is spot on. So we did identify Country Way as a potential challenge. We know there's an issue there with traffic cutting through the neighborhood. So that is one of the specific recommendations in the corridor study, is at least have some sort of interim improvement to try to stop some of that. But like Bob said, it is a public right of way. So, technically we can't stop or restrict vehicles. There are some potential improvements that could be made in the short term, but again, the long-term solution is, provide a thoroughfare on West Reserve that actually accommodates those people, so they aren't inclined to try to cut through a neighborhood.
Jacqueline, I'm going to kick this question to you. What is the usual time to inform utilities to plan in case of having to move or upgrade to prepare for when road work is happening?
Yeah, so I don't have a specific date for this study, just because we need to get an actual construction project and design project going. So once we know what the scope of the project is going to be, we contact the utility companies immediately to let them know that we have a project going. At that time, we usually don't know enough of the details on what exactly the impacts are going to be. It's more us seeking information from the utility companies to get an idea of exactly what's out there and where it is. So once we do get further into design, we will then coordinate again with the utility companies and start negotiating with them on any relocations that are needed.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
Yep.
Cody, will there be a buffer zone between Reserve and the bike paths on the north and south side of the road? At least what is proposed in the draft
Sure.
study.
Yeah, this is a great question. So through discussion with the locals there, the city and county and so forth, we had a healthy discussion about what the cross section would be for West Reserve. One of the things that needs to be considered is snow storage in Kalispell. And so typically what we see is a 6 foot, we'll call it a boulevard, but it's basically a buffer or a snow storage area. And so the cross sections that we've turned into graphics within the draft corridor study do show a 6 foot section between the road and those paths.
Bob, do you want to add anything to that?
I think Cody did a great job. I will clarify one thing for those of you on the meeting though, and the cross section is simply what does the lane configuration in the sidewalk look like? So it'll show right away on one side, and then maybe the sidewalk, and then the next feature that you'll see is the boulevard area, the grassy area that also holds snow during the winter months, and then the curb and gutter across the road. And it will also show the lane configurations as well as shoulder widths. And those are out there on the website. So I encourage everyone to go take a look at some proposed the plans and some graphics you can look at.
Bob, one other question for you. One of the solutions is to move some of the traffic to Rose Crossing or some other cross street. Has this been discussed?
Again, we don't want to promote moving traffic to other roads that are not what we call on system. And that simply means that we're trying to accommodate the traffic that wants to utilize roads maintained by the state on those state routes. So Rose Crossing, for example, is not a state route. That's a county road. It isn't built to the same standards as what our primary route systems are. And we want to keep our roads, our traffic on our roads, if you will, from an MDT standpoint. We definitely work with our partner agencies, the city and the county, but we recognize traffic may choose to use those, but we do not direct traffic to leave our routes to get onto other routes that aren't maintained by us, if that makes sense.
And Bob, I might add one more thing to add to this. So the study did consider some of these other potential connections. We do coordinate with the city and county on some of their objectives as well within the transportation network. But one of the conclusions we came to with the study was that even if some of these other connections were made, it doesn't change the outcome on West Reserve Drive. West Reserve would still need to have a 5-lane section. So it doesn't necessarily change the outcome of our study.
Thanks, Cody. Bob, another question for you from the same person. Has noise been considered, and are there any solutions for that?
You know, in this study, we did not evaluate noise. We do have a process in place that we utilize, but that we're not at the right time. We can't evaluate noise until we have a design to utilize for that evaluation. So we do have standards through, again, as I said earlier in the presentation, this is we're funded by Federal Highway Administration dollars. So we have to make sure that we're following the processes. So, in the future, we do know that any improvements or projects that we do have planned are going to follow the guidance that we have from FHWA as far as noise studies.
Thanks, Bob. Cody, I'm going to give this next question to you. Would it be feasible to change the traffic light to have all Whitefish Stage North turning east or westbound traffic move solely, and then all south turning east, west traffic moving alone, leaving Reserve just as it is with the turn signal? Does that make sense to you? I'm not sure I entirely understand it.
Yeah, it's right. Essentially, the question's asking about phasing the traffic signal to try to move traffic differently. It's a good question. We did look at some of those potentials to just improve signal timing. There are some short-term gains that could be made. Those could be made by basically local MDT traffic technicians. Again, part of the corridor planning process is to look at the long term, like what is the long-term health of the corridor and how do we fix these real issues that are out there. We're looking for solutions that benefit long-term. So, essentially the recommendations that we have in the draft corridor study are kind of, what needs to be out there to really improve operations and safety, like we were saying with the needs and objectives. There may be some small potential gains with some traffic phasing switches and so forth. Again, that was kind of beyond the reach of what we do with the planning study.
And I'll take that, add to that a little bit.
Sure.
So we've got a traffic engineer right in Kalispell. We've looked at this intersection repeatedly. The problem with doing what's proposed is it increases the downtime for east and west traffic. And anytime you split phase is what we call it, that means that you're just by the nature of having all southbound traffic moving and then northbound traffic moving, it increases the amount of red time, because when you transition from one phase to another phase, there's a period where all signals have to be red. So if you increase another phase, it sounds really simple, but there's 60 seconds in a minute. And if we have 40 seconds dedicated to through traffic east-west, but we know that we also have to have turn lanes in there, but let's just say it's 40 seconds. Every time that we add another phase, we have to add a minimum of 3 seconds of all red where no traffic moves. Right now, we've got it set up. There's 3 phases out there. There's a left turn for Reserve Street. And then there's a through phase for Reserve Street. And then there's the through turn phase for Whitefish Stage. So that means that we transition through 3 phases. We've got 9 seconds of all red out there. If we add another phase, that just takes 3 more seconds that no traffic is moving. And the benefit of trying to split the phase, it doesn't work out. We tried it for a while and found out that it actually, not only does it not get us any improvements, it increases the amount of time that traffic is stopped on Reserve, which is where our real significant backups are. And if anybody would like to have further discussion, I have an excellent traffic engineer that I'll get you in touch with.
Okay, at this point, we've got one more question in the queue. So I would prompt if anyone has any lingering questions to put them in the Q&A. The question we've got is, what is the soonest we might anticipate any improvements to aid in traffic flow? Jacqueline might be able to speak to this.
Yeah, this is a good question, and I know it's probably the burning question on everybody's minds. There's the need out there, and seeing these recommendations just gets everybody much more excited. What we need to do is we need to wrap up this study, which we're really close to doing, and we need to identify what funding we have and what we can do with that funding. So at this time, I don't have a date to share. We do know that there is a need out there and that there's a strong desire to get something done sooner rather than later. So once this is complete, we can look and see what we have the money to do, and we'll get started on something. Bob, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, that's a great job of explaining it. Again, it goes back to the simple fact that we've got so many hundreds of millions of dollars of identified needs in Western Montana and not hundreds of millions of dollars to build with. It really is a funding puzzle. Recognize the needs, but it comes down to what other project that's already on the books and been promised to their local citizens are we going to delay to move this project forward. That's the harsh reality of where we are right now.
Okay, that is the end of all of the questions in the queue. With that, we'll linger for a few minutes so people have an opportunity to put any more questions in there. Vicki, do you want to provide any kind of parting thoughts, next steps? The comment period is open for 30 days now, is that right?
It is. It starts today, and as you mentioned, there are numerous ways to comment. There is a link on the website, and you can also call me. My information is right there, or email me. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and participating in this. We really appreciate it.
Okay, one more question came in. Cody, regarding access, the lower part of West Reserve has multiple driveways coming out directly on the road. This is a residential area. Any resolution for traffic issues in this area?
Well, that's a good question. One of the recommendations coming through the draft study right now is to take a further look at access along the corridor. Again, this is beyond the scope of what a corridor study would include, but essentially we are making a recommendation that further review is necessary, taking a look at the access along the entire corridor, and then coming up with a plan and strategies for the future.
Okay. Bob, before we wrap up, do you want to provide any additional thoughts or parting comments?
I just want to again thank everybody for joining us. Encourage everyone to go out, take a look at what the documents we have out on the project page. Provide comments. They are valuable to us. Make sure we're not missing anything. And the last thing is, again, I want to reiterate that I am a resident of the community. I have been in a position where I've turned on to reserve and said, crap, what was I thinking? I just got myself into this backup. I definitely recognize the need. And I just asked everybody understand the challenges that that staff has and that we have here at MDT, trying to figure out what the funding looks like. We do want to move something forward. I can tell you that every elected official I meet with in the Valley, one of the top 2 questions that is asked of me is when are we going to get something done with West Reserve? So it's high on everybody's list. It's a challenging area. We were able to get the project or the route moved to a different funding category, so there is more availability of funding, but it also got into a pot of money now that's also has, it's strapped for funds. So we are doing everything we can to move it forward as fast as possible. I wish that someplace I moved to Western Montana about 10 years ago. I'm still hoping that somebody's going to find some money trees and all the forest that grows over here. But until we find that, it's just a matter of my constant challenge is working with Jacqueline and others on how are we going to find the funding and how are we going to put this big puzzle together. But this is, we recognize a key piece and really, there's a great desire to move this project forward just as soon as possible.
Thanks, Bob. So next steps, we mentioned that the draft study is available on the project website, which is there on your screen. It's on the MDT website, the public involvement component, and then the unique indicator is West Reserve. You can also just Google MDT West Reserve Corridor Study and it should pop up. You can provide comment right there on the website using the MDT comment function, or you can send comments directly to Vicky, and her contact information is provided on the screen as well. So with that, I think that's the end of our content, but the project team will linger for just a few more minutes to catch any last minute questions. Like I said, if you have any comments, you are certainly welcome to put those in the Q&A as well. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending today. We do certainly appreciate your interest in this corridor and hope that the draft study is of use to all of you in the community.